everybody. My name's Polita Clark. I'm the environment correspondent for the Financial Times. Gives me very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Adnan Amin, the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. I know he needs very little introduction to many of you. He's a regular at many of our conferences, and I'm sure many others you've attended. He has many years' experience in the area of renewable energy. He is a member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Group on Sustainable Energy for All, and he was elected the first Director General of IRENA just in April last year. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Adnan to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilita, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Last year I was only in the job a few months when I was invited by Ed Crooks and put on a panel with very passionate members of the fossil fuel industry who united in the conviction that renewables was a waste of time and it was a totally niche type of luxury activity. And I think my very feisty and somewhat undiplomatic responses so entertained the Financial Times that you've asked me back this year. I'm very pleased to be here. We had a day and a half of very interesting discussion. I think that I don't want to repeat some of the really interesting dimensions of the energy discussion that came up yesterday, but I thought I'd step back and look at the bigger picture issues when we look at the future of renewables. There are many things that we don't see when you're engaged in the very specific discussions on projects and programs that are actually really changing the world in very decisive ways. And in my view, there are two real mega trends that are influencing the future of energy in the world. The first, and many have mentioned this, is climate change. But let me look at this in a slightly different context. First, I want to say that there is no debate on the science. So any illusion that we really don't know, that the jury is out on climate, if you just look at the trends of climate change around the world and the implication this is having for societies around the world. In my own country, in Kenya, I mentioned last year that one of the major environmental indicators, the snow cap of Kilimanjaro and the rate that it was disappearing, the pronounced droughts that we've had, the variability of rainfall in a rain-fed agriculture country and what that does to food security is frightening. And we're seeing it around the world. We're seeing mega trends, storms of dimensions that we have not seen before, frequency and severity. We're seeing droughts, and the world is changing. And we need to have coping strategies. And in the context of the ongoing international discussion, people mentioned that the price of carbon is now $7 or €7. It is quite scary that the international normative discussion on climate change and international action has not resulted in the kind of binding agreements that we need to make this happen, which gives us a different perspective of what the solution could potentially be. And for me, the major part of the solution is going to be how we handle the energy system of the world in the coming time, and in particular, the role that renewables is going to play in this. It's often the case when a crisis of the ramifications of climate change takes place over time, and we only experience it in slow motion, as it were, we become inured to those trends. But I think that we need to raise the consciousness of the public on what this actually means to the future and what our response has to be to this. The other mega trend is that the world is now at 7 billion people. 7 billion people on this planet. We are seeing major instability in the world now, which comes from inequality, resource scarcity, environmental degradation. The crisis we have at the moment in terms of the food prices, food security issues, price of energy, water, the multiple aspects of this, which are also linked to the economic crisis. Really, one of the threads that runs through all of this is how our energy system has evolved over the years. And I was still a little boy in 1973. when we had the first major oil shock and what has happened in terms of fossil fuels since that time. That's another syndrome that we are seeing in terms of slow motion response to crisis. It is a crisis proportions. The Financial Times had an article on its front page this morning about the management of the price, and even Saudi Arabia is getting scared of the high price of fossil fuels, which is quite instructive to think about the future of this. So how we handle energy in the context of the nexus between food and food security, water, and energy is going to be critical for the sustainability for the future. So today, there's a global recognition that the quest for affordable, clean, and secure energy in the face of the multiple challenges we confront is a defining issue of our time. The evidence of this is all around us. Today, at least 118 countries now have some type of national policy target on renewable support policy, an increase of 65 countries since 2005. The awareness is out there. A global record of 83.5 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity was installed only last year. Globally, we've been focusing a lot on the UK and European markets, but I think we need to look globally at this. The cost of solar PV fell by 60% over the last 2 years. Total global investment in 2011 grew to a record of US dollars 263 billion. Major milestone was passed last year when renewable energy actually became a $1 trillion industry, signifying to its economic significance for the future. Although the current prolonged economic downturn has raised questions regarding support policies for renewables, overall, Europe is demonstrating substantial commitment to their renewable energy targets. I was in Cyprus a couple of days ago at the EU Ministerial Council meeting on energy. A great discussion on where do we go after 2020. Is it on emissions reductions, or is it on a new target of 30% for renewables? But the impressive thing for me was that there was a common conviction throughout the European Union that there is a need for a new and more ambitious policy in the future. In the EU alone, renewables accounted for more than half of all newly installed electrical capacity for the 4th year in a row and represented 12.4% of gross final total energy consumption. We believe that Europe is on track to meet its 20% target by 2020, and that this will be the beginning of a virtuous circle of growth, employment, and a new economic paradigm as industries, as economies of scale and the demonstration effect of investment kicks in. The current turbulence in the industry, particularly related to government support, is, in my view, not a cause for alarm for us, nor a sign that renewable energy is losing momentum. Instead, to me, it reaffirms the coming of age of the renewable energy technologies that now have to compete in the marketplace, and we had long discussion about this yesterday. We believe the industry is going through a shake-up from which it will emerge stronger, while at the same time effective and efficient policies tailored specifically to these markets and technologies are creating an enabling environment attractive to ongoing investment. Let me take the example of one medium-sized wind turbine producer in Germany, Nordex. They've been through a 3-year process of restructuring their supply chain, restructuring their operations, innovating in the design of their turbines, and today they have achieved a 20% cost reduction in their operations, and they have sold out their entire production of their new turbine for the next year. This is the wave of the future, and I think that the shakeout in the industry is going to lead to leaner, more effective, more profitable companies. As the case for renewables improves, more countries are implementing policy-assisted markets to hedge against future energy price uncertainties and enhance their energy security. The global expansion of enabling policies positively affects the geography of the renewable energy market. Ambitious policy targets, moreover, appear increasingly attainable because of the great strides forward in technology and cost effectiveness of renewables and the innovation processes. Markets are increasingly emerging outside of traditional developed economies in more geographically and economically diverse areas. These emerging markets can often be characterized as having sustained economic growth, a strong natural resource endowment, and rapidly expanding populations with growing energy demands. There are abundant examples of states that are making decisive steps to overcome particular energy challenges by turning to renewables and incorporating the appropriate mix of new and established renewable technologies. And Europe, with its wealth of knowledge, technical expertise, and experience, and this goes for the UK in particular, this defines its comparative advantage in the global market in the future, and Europe and the UK must be a full partner in this global trend in the future. Now, instead of continuing to read a speech to you, let me share with you the kind of instances I have come across that indicate to me what the trends of the future are going to be in my various meetings around the world. It's great to have my job because it gives you unprecedented access to some of the policymakers and decision makers who are actually engaged today in charting the future of their societies. So just to give you some examples, everybody is talking about Japan. Since Fukushima, I have been to Japan 4 times. Even when I didn't want to take the 14-hour flight, I was compelled by urgent invitations from Japan because they have been engaged since Fukushima in a detailed, inclusive, and substantive review of their energy policy, which they have announced a couple of days ago. And this is something all of you must read because I think the preambular part of that policy sets out the basis for a new vision for society in a mature industrial economy that I found really very inspiring. I was even invited early on in this discussion, it's unprecedented for somebody running a new agency, to address the Prime Minister and Crown Prince of Japan on sustainable energy for the future as part of their internal debate. You have powerful opinion in the Japanese public about nuclear energy and the future renewable energy mix in their society. This is fueling the political survivability of any government, and I think that this process is unstoppable. I had a meeting with the Foreign Minister of Japan a few months ago when he was visiting Abu Dhabi. He told me of their strong commitment to take this process forward. He told me that there are 3 issues where they're going to make their bet. One is on the development and innovation around the smart grid for the future, because that's going to be essential for the integrated system they want in Japan. They're going to make a massive bet on innovation in storage, especially in batteries, and they're looking at how they can dramatically change the efficiency of their transmission of electricity. They've developed an innovative idea of sustainable cities using green energy, and the new energy policy calls for a phase-out of nuclear power before the end of the 2030s, in 2 decades. They've announced a $500 billion investment program for renewable energy over this period, and double that for energy efficiency. This is a nationally nationally owned organic process, and they see it, this is the most instructive part for me, they see it as a positive growth strategy of the future for their society and for their economy and the sustainability of their model. And this goes to the point that James Cameron raised yesterday. It's not the dollars and cents around each particular project that we need to be looking at. It's really, what are we doing for the national patrimony? What are we doing in terms of the development of our societies? And what are we looking at forward about the sustainability of our economic, social, and environmental models? This is the issue as far as the energy system is concerned. I've been to China 4 times. As you can imagine, I have a lot of air miles, which I really don't want to take up. But last month, China quadrupled its solar target to 21 gigawatts by 2015. They're already a world leader in wind. One of the dominant discussions last time I was in China was about the impact of the punitive tariffs that the US was implementing against Chinese PV and what it meant for them. And my answer basically was that I cannot understand your anxiety because you have a domestic market of 1.2 billion people with a hugely growing energy demand that you haven't even begun to address yet. You have an issue of carbon reduction in your production that you need to address. I see a huge market domestically, but you also need to engage, given your competitive edge in solar PV and wind, with the emerging markets of the world where the need for investment today is greater than anywhere else. Recently, China estimated that it's going to spend $373 billion on energy conservation and emission reductions in 5 years on plans to reduce energy intensity by 16% by 2015. And this has spurred a huge growth in, new growth spurt in renewable energy. China clean energy generation rose by 31% in July compared to the same period last year. Now, let me move to my continent, to Africa. All the numbers that you hear about the number of the billions who have no access to modern electricity services, they're mostly in my continent. We have only 20% with direct access to electricity. But what we are seeing in Africa is a new horizon for the first time in a long time. All of us who worked in development and economics know about the lost decades of the 80s and 90s. We had stagnation, poverty, economic growth, civil strife. Today, out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in terms of growth rates last year, 6 of them were African. When I go back home to Kenya, and I see the tremendous investment that is going on in infrastructure, the thinking on energy, the education processes that have taken place, the penetration of mobile telephony and the internet across the country, it's a transformative moment. We are faced with rapid growth in infrastructure and rapid demand growth in energy. There's a recent Frost & Sullivan report which says that investment in renewables in power is set to grow from 3.6 billion in Africa in 2011 to 57 billion by 2020. Massive increase in renewables. Now, we have a huge opportunity in Africa to look at a new model. If we choose in Africa, in light of our energy demand and the way it is growing and our infrastructure needs, to go with the safe bet of following fossils and coal, what do you think that is going to do to the emissions picture worldwide? What is it going to do to the sustainability of the African growth model that we have now a very positive picture for the first time in a long time? I think we have no option except to begin to explore the ambitious development of renewable energy technology based on the immense natural wealth that Africa has in geothermal, solar, wind, and hydro. I have a colleague from Kenya who's here. He's building transmission lines from Ethiopia through Kenya to Tanzania, across to Zambia, into Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi to develop an interconnected grid in Eastern Africa that's going to allow Eastern Africa to create stability in its grid by creating an integrated system that brings online geothermal, solar, and wind resources. The immense geothermal development that's happening in Kenya and Ethiopia today could power the entire East African community in the future in terms of the baseload. This is a huge opportunity, and I think that this is something where international cooperation at its best can make a difference. I was mentioned I was recently at the EU Ministerial Council on Energy in Cyprus a few days ago. In addition to discussing their renewables target, what I found the most interesting was here you have this European commissioner, very, very hard-headed, sober German decision maker, Günther Oettinger. Everybody's scared of him. They think he's anti-renewables. But he asks hard questions, and I think that's the way it should be. But I haven't heard him getting lyrical until he started talking about the question of grid infrastructure in Europe. He spoke about the fact that you have all of these interconnections with the traditional infrastructure of road, rail, and air. But the absolute paucity of infrastructure for energy is not allowing Europe to really take advantage of its energy potential for the future. And I think that the growth of infrastructure, where they are looking at developing an ambitious program in the future for the grid, will enable a ramping up of renewable uptake in Europe in the future. Now, there's a lot of discussion on this at the international level. Pelita mentioned that I'm on the Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. They've set a very ambitious target globally of doubling the share of renewable energy by 2030. And we absolutely believe that this is doable. In IRENA, we have already started a process of developing a roadmap for the global community on how we could get there. We're going to evaluate the implications of different pathways towards a doubling of the share of renewables in the global energy mix by 2030. We're going to highlight opportunities for international cooperation for renewable energy technology development and deployment. We believe there are huge opportunities here. And we're going to highlight opportunities for renewable technology deployment in end-use sectors too, where we also believe there's a major opportunity. These are promising times for renewable energy, despite what you might have heard from some yesterday. Today, renewables represent a quarter of global power capacity from all sources and deliver 18% of global electrical supply. This, however, is a small percentage considering the potential that renewables present for affordable, clean, and secure energy. And I think the presentation by Martin Lidegaard this morning about the Danish experience is really, for me, a very instructive example. And I hope that the Financial Times is going to carry this tomorrow. With the scale of investment that is required in renewable energy to meet the various targets that we now have worldwide, including the aspirational target of doubling by 2030, the real change in terms of scale for renewable energy investment is going to come from the private sector, with governments ensuring that the enabling policy environment for investment is in place, as well as protections such as environmental and social safeguards. My organization, IRENA, it's only in existence a year and a half as a formal entity. There was a long preparatory process for this, but we've experienced exponential growth in interest from countries in engagement. But IRENA is supporting countries by pursuing specific areas which is of primary practical interest. We've initiated studies on comparative technology costs, showing that investments in renewables can compete in pure economic terms against fossil fuels. We provide advisory services on technological and infrastructure development, utilizing our growing expertise within the agency, as well as tapping our network of partners. We are developing a global atlas project, which aims to gather data on renewable energy potential worldwide into a central open access database, mapping each country's renewable energy resources potential as a starting point for investors. We actively consult with stakeholders, governments, and other relevant actors to assist countries in their efforts to accelerate deployment of renewables. To expand our coverage, we are establishing partnerships and cooperation mechanisms with stakeholders, including industry, the business community, and international organizations. Our focus is on finding practical solutions and getting the momentum of renewable energy investment moving fast. The approach we have taken is that the case for renewable energy can only succeed if there is a compelling business case. We are convinced that there is. We have 3 planks to our program. Our vision of IRENA is that we should become the global voice for renewable energy. It's an issue that has really engaged governments as well as the private sector. We are in the process of setting up a private sector advisory panel to our General Assembly, but it's quite clear that in the industry there is an increasing feeling that the voice of the industry is not clear. It is fragmented. The competing sectors have very clear messages, and we need to develop a compelling vision of what's possible with renewables. The second plank of it is as a hub for cooperation. I worked almost 20 years in the United Nations, and I learned what not to do. What you don't do is develop an inflexible, heavy bureaucracy that's going to be there for a long time and gets de-skilled over time with political influences that don't allow you to change. We want to keep a lean organization, but we want to create a platform where every player in the renewable energy industry can come and where they can find an identity and where they can find some kind of support. And the third is an advisory resource. We have a huge demand from developing countries in terms of what are the specific choices they need to make. How do they move forward on technology? If they're confronted with 5 or 6 choices, what are the parameters around which they need advice, make a decision? And so this kind of describes basically the area we're working on. I'm sure many of you may not have heard of us, but I believe that you are going to be hearing from us in the future. Thank you, Pelita.
Thank you very much, Adnan. That was.
Would you like me to come there?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting overview of renewable energy policy around the world, and I think we have got time for a couple of questions. If yes, I can see some hands going up. Thank you.
Musa Kwonga from the Financial Times. Just a quick question. A fantastic talk, by the way. Talking of Africa, what do you see as the challenges to bringing renewable energy projects to scale in the continent?
The challenge is infrastructure. We need the infrastructure because we have a massive resource. The gentleman sitting next to you can tell you about the geothermal potential in Kenya and in Ethiopia. But I think we need to learn from the experience of countries we see around the world. If you look at the Scandinavian model of grid integration, that allows them to balance their energy with the wind, with the hydro, with the gas and oil, with the biomass in Finland, and they have an interconnected grid that actually creates a very healthy infrastructure. Nobody is saying that we're going to go to 100% renewables overnight, but we need a healthy ecosystem of the energy mix, and I think the real challenge for Africa is going to be, one, infrastructure development, but the second is financing. And we had a very interesting panel yesterday talking about the constraints on financing. Problem in Africa is that many of the bankable projects don't have access to the kind of financing that comes from capital markets in developed economies. And that unlocking that and ensuring that the governance and security of investment issues are addressed by governments is going to be the secret of development in Africa.
Any other questions? Can't actually. I just wanted to quickly ask you a variation of a topic that's arisen throughout the conference, really, and that is that although we're seeing tremendous growth in renewable energy, we're also seeing a huge amount of excitement about shale gas, not just in the US, but with a lot of hope that the industrial benefits that have been seen in the US will eventually be seen elsewhere. And surely that is going to be a problem for many renewable industry companies.
It depends how you look at it. But I heard the concept of the Ponzi scheme. I have to look into that a little more in terms of what it means. We have the environmental issues around it. We have the whole issue of the long-term financing of shale gas. But shale gas, I'm not religious about shale gas. For me, shale gas presents a lower carbon, flexible energy source that can actually support the enhanced introduction of renewables by addressing the baseload question. So I think that there are issues we have to look at in terms of how shale gas can be used in a more structural way to develop a more broader growth of the energy mix in the future, rather than the kind of bonanza attitude that's taking place at the moment. One of the issues that was discussed in the European setting the other day was that why do we have to establish a new infrastructure for gas transmission in Europe? It's very expensive, it's difficult, there are social issues. Why don't we find a location for electricity generation using gas at large scale and develop our grid architecture that can actually carry the electricity? So there are different models to it. I don't think, given the nature of growth in demand that we see worldwide, I don't think gas is going to actually present a huge impediment to renewables. But like the economic crisis, like the review of the subsidies we're seeing right now, it requires more thinking about the business model for the future.
Well, thank you so much. I think we may, in fact, be in one of the few rooms in London today where we're talking about getting lyrical about grid infrastructure, but long may it last. And thanks so much for a very informative talk. Thanks,
Thank you.
Adnan.
Thank you, Valita. Yeah.